All right, thank you, everybody. It is 6:48 p.m. We are in the Smart Growth meeting. I'm Nicole Shimoni, your chair, with my cohort Lisa Dorsey and Bernie Flynn. We're calling this meeting to order, and first order of business is announcements. Any announcements? Okay. Second order of business, any comments, suggestions, petitions by residents in attendance regarding items not on the agenda? We're just rolling along. That's good. We're going to catch up from public safety. All right, director's report. All right, we got a hit.
Good evening, Sally Sloop, Director of Building and Housing. I'll first start off with some items of interest, which are two land development applications. Since this memo, I wrote this memo on August 9th, there has been some changes. Both 410 South High Street and 250 East Market Street will both now be heard by the Planning Commission on August 27th. In my memo, I talked about August 20th. That has changed due to there's been a conflict, as that is also the night of the borough work session. And the same applicant has to come before the council for the work session, the same consultants. So we had to switch some things around. So for 410 South High Street, it's a little unique. The developer has submitted a second preliminary plan, which always doesn't happen, meaning the first is still active as well, but this is the second one that is currently under review by the Planning Commission. So I highlighted the differences between the first prelim plan and the second prelim plan, which, as you can see, is the difference of the units from 128 to 139, parking spaces 149 to 175, and also retail space. The first prelim plan had retail space. The second one does not. So this will be the third time they've come before the Planning Commission for the second prelim plan. They're working through some issues right now on building height and primarily building height specifically, and I think the build 2 line as well. 250 East Market Street, that is a final land development plan submission. Council previously approved the prelim plan. This will be on the Planning Commission's 827 agenda, and then it will come back before this committee in September for review. And then it will go to Borough Council probably first for the work session in October or late September.
Is that the Rubenstein's building?
Yes.
For some reason, I thought that was already final approved.
No.
No.
No. It was prelim.
Okay.
So moving right along the zoning hearing board, busy month for the zoning hearing board. There's two applications under review for August 26th. One is, as you're aware of, the 1 South Brandywine special exception for Shannon and Christopher Mandine, and then the Michaels Organization special exception, which is also known as 5 North Adams Street. That is going to be, that applicant is going to ask the zoning hearing board for a continuance till September. Okay. Regarding Harb, the July meeting did not have a quorum of members present, so votes could not be taken. So unfortunately, there's going to be a little bit of a backlog in the September Smart Growth Committee. And then Building and Housing Statistics Summary, there's several different reports attached for your review. We've had 64, this is for the month of July, we had 64 rental inspections conducted. We issued 78 permits. We had 21 cases of property maintenance reported, 0 disruptive conduct reports received, 0 citations, 0 points assigned, as we just went through that process with the chief of police. And then trash tickets issued were 6. This is our, what we call our shoulder season. As we know, the students are returning in a couple weeks, so I'm sure that will be an increase in trash tickets, but it's been fairly slow in July.
Similar to what I told Chief Lee, I'd love it if, there would be some kind of like chart that then tracks through time. So we're not just looking at it as static at 1 month, but that we can track and then track into resolution. I know you have a lot of data. I looked at the data that was put, on the web, and there's a lot of great data in here. There's data in there that Marty's no longer here, but I think you could do like pivot tables off of to get him like the information that he was asking for. So you've got a lot of good data. It's
Yep,
just
we do.
how do we take it so that we're not just looking at it in a static way, but we can track it and see where the resolutions are coming in.
We want it to be meaningful, absolutely. Any other questions?
All right.
Okay, thank you.
All right, now we're moving on to old business. So the minutes for July 10th, 2024. Everyone good with moving forward with that one to consent? Okay. Motion to direct the solicitor to attend August 26th zoning hearing on 5 North Adams. I think that.
Our recommendation to the committee is to table this item because of the applicant allowing additional 30 days for review. So it would fall we could fall into our September meeting cycle to make that call in terms of directing the solicitor. The issue before the zoning hearing board has to do entirely with floodplain and whether and certain relief is required in order for the applicant to build what they are proposing. And there is a disagreement between the borough and the applicant as to whether they need use variances or special exceptions. And the applicant's requested the applicant has allowed us to have another 30 days to make those determinations. So we could have this discussion. I recommend we table it and have this discussion in September.
Doesn't look like there's any questions from here, so we'll table that. Okay. All right, item C, Chapter 37, Keeping of Poultry and Hogs. Bernie here has had a little chuckle because I know this is near and dear to his heart. And there's an exception here. Oh, look at that. Hey, chickens.
I got chickens.
Those are roosters, though, aren't they? Yeah.
That one likes a rooster. He's not allowed there.
Uh-oh.
He's a vagrant. We gotta get rid of him. All right. First, let me start out with how we got here. We had a resident come to us and ask us to do a review of our existing ordinance for 25 feet from any structure and 10 feet from any side yard. And that resident had 2 permits in order to meet the requirements that she needed. There's also chickens down on South Franklin Street and East Niels, and a totally different setup down in that area. After reviewing everything that we have going on, the chickens are not domestic pets. They're just not. They're animals. They're farm creatures that produce food. And the problem with having chickens in an urban setting is that the confinement is very, very strict. In our Chapter 37, I spent a lot of time on the internet trying to find things and send it to Sally and to Sean. And it's clearly written in our Chapter 37, everything that has to be done. The reason why we have a 10-foot setback on either side is because of noise and areas for the chickens to be able to roam around the backyard once they're out of the cage, which they're allowed to be out of the cage. They're not allowed to be in the front yard. You can't see them from the front yard. And you're supposed to have a fence so you can't see the chickens at all. Chickens are extremely noisy. I sat down on East Neal Street and listened. They talk a lot to one another. And when they lay an egg, it's almost like the 4th of July. They're very, very excited. Over with Miss Polk, unfortunately, her backyard is the same as my backyard. It's very narrow. It's about 20 feet wide. And she was trying to maximize her footprint in order to raise chickens. We're only allowed to have a maximum of 6 chickens at all in any one residential property. It's written right here in the code. And then there's more of a criteria. You have to have 2 square feet for every chicken that you do have. So Miss Polk over there was doing the best she can to live back to nature of what was happening, but unfortunately, her property just wasn't suited for the 6 chickens because it wasn't big enough. So she requested a neighbor behind her to use part of their property so she could satisfy the requirement. The 25 foot from any structure is pretty important. The lady and the gentleman that live down on South Franklin Street, if you go down there and take a look at it, they have their chicken coop in the corner, and it's a very large open yard where the chickens can get out and run around, do what they need to do. Keeping chickens penned up 24/7, 7 days a week. In this report here that you have from the Humane Society of the United States, they recommend that the chickens be let out so they can free range so much during the day. And unfortunately, over where Miss Polk was, that wasn't really truly possible because there wasn't enough room for the chickens to move around. But down here on South Franklin Street and East Nields, there's plenty of room. There are plenty of houses in the borough that have plenty of side yard that can have chickens if they want them, so that it'd be safer for the animals. But in order to treat the animals humanely, there's a lot of restrictions in our Chapter 37 and with the Humane Society on how to treat these animals. The borough does not have a chicken expert. So we can only go there to see if the house or the hutch is 10 feet from the side yard and whether it's 25 feet. We have no control over the health of the chickens. No one's really taking the chickens to a veterinarian. No one's checking the eggs to make sure the eggs are safe to give away, because salmonella could come in the eggs. So there's a lot of things that go along with that I learned about chickens. And we know that chickens are dirty birds, and their living conditions in our ordinance clearly spells out how you're supposed to keep the cage clean, how you're supposed to care for the food, and the maximum width of everything else. My humble opinion, I don't believe we should, after doing all this research and checking on what we have Miss Polk that has 2 permits, and we have the family down on South Franklin Street that has a very, very old permit. They have not updated their permit in years. Because of the environment and because of the care for the animals, I think we should keep, and it's up to you guys to decide whether you agree, keep the existing ordinance as it's written, because it's written extremely well. And it's copied quite a bit from the Humane Society of the United States. Our inspectors or our officers can only look. They can't tell you if a chicken's healthy or not healthy. They can't tell whether the chicken has a proper roost to get in to put the eggs in. There's a lot that goes into it. And as a borough, we're not geared to inspecting this type of farm animal, except for protecting the neighbors from nuisances and public disruption. So it's, I think what we should probably think about keeping the 25 feet from any building and 10 feet from the side yards, but it's up to the committee.
So that was a very long way. Let's,
Okay, no.
let's keep the ordinance the way that it is. I guess I'm a little confused because I thought that we had previously approved permitting this resident to have chickens. If my memory fails me, please correct me, but this, I'm pretty sure was on the agenda in June, maybe? It was tabled. Okay, see? My memory fails me. I will tell you, Mr. Flynn, that there are more than 2 chicken keepers in the borough. I know of at least one that you haven't mentioned, but I do believe that your recommendation to maintain the ordinance as it exists makes sense. I am familiar with Ms. Polk's property. And the chickens would be out in the open and very close to her neighbors.
I have a couple questions.
Sure.
Well, first of all, I have a statement. I am fascinated by the amount of research and work that you have put into learning about chickens and the ordinances and the care of chickens. I'm fascinated. Your brain, if you went on Jeopardy, you would own that
The chicken.
you would own the chicken line of questioning. Yes. You can take that for 1,000. Okay, but serious question. And so Ms. Polk, just remind me of the whole scenario again. So Ms. Polk came to us and wanted us to amend the ordinance because she just wanted to have more chickens to be able to be in her yard, or some chickens. And I thought it was some chickens, but then you said she had chickens and she gave them to her neighbors because she had 6.
Yeah.
So like,
So what happened was she has 2, Ms. Polk has 1 permit, and the neighbor behind them on Franklin Street has the other permit, if I'm correct. And Ms. Polk would give eggs to the neighbor to use the 25-foot setback. What the problem we were having with Denise was that from the structure, excuse me, the side yards, she couldn't meet the 10-foot side yard setback. She could only meet 5 feet.
so are we not reissuing the permit? Is that, I mean, she already has the permit, so.
And I'm confused because Ms. Polk.
Okay.
Well,
Are you looking at the right property?
I just know Ms. Polk, the people right behind them, her property's here, and it's the property right here, right behind her.
But they both had permits.
Yeah, they both have permits, and our chapter 37 doesn't say that they have to renew the permits every year.
So they can keep their permits,
keep their
whether we
permits.
change the ordinance or not.
I would believe so,
think-
except for the setback.
And I don't think she has chickens today. I walk by her property almost every day. I don't ever recall seeing chickens.
But she has a permit.
She was asked, she may have a permit that she's not using. As I recall, to Mr. Flynn's point, her yard is long and narrow. She could not accommodate the 10-foot requirement on either side that's required for the coop. She was asking for an exception because she can put it far enough back in her backyard that would separate it from, her neighbors, the nearby residents. So she was asking for an exception of distance requirement.
But, and so yes, and so that's kind of checks with my memory, right? And so I was like, well, if somebody wants to have some chickens, why not? She seems like responsible, so, but what we're saying is she already has the permit. So whether we change the ordinance or not, is she able to have her chickens?
I don't think, now, this is a personal opinion. Mr. Metric knows the rules better, and so does Ms. Sleuth. If you can't meet the requirement, I think you have to forfeit your permit because she was asking for a variance and we're not willing to give the variance right now to squash the chicken coop in there. It's a shame she can't turn it sideways, but then she still can't meet the 10 feet on either side. This is one of those things, just like totes, we just don't pay attention to too much because it doesn't come up that often. But if you really want to see how chickens really look happy, go to East Neal Street, and it's a wonderful setup they
Like
have.
the happy cows.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's
little chicken.
it's a wonderful setup that they have there. Unfortunately, hopefully, Ms. Polk doesn't want to renew her permit or whatever, because she would not meet the 10 feet on either side and the 25 feet back. She meet the 25 feet, I think, but not the 10 feet. So it's a shame, because I know she's back to nature, kind of person.
So Ms. Sloop or Mr. Metric, do you know, like, if she already has a permit, is she permitted to, Ms. Shimoni's, is she permitted to use it, whether she meets the requirements or not, or she has to forfeit it?
I don't,
I am 99.9% sure she does not currently have chickens on her property.
So hypothetical, if she did have the permit already, as I'm going to trust the person that did the most research on this topic. So let's say she did have the permit already, but she doesn't have the right size yard. Yes, what happens to her permit? Does somebody go out there, like, does she, like, yeah, what's the process? Sally? Yes, please help. Thank you.
My apologies that I don't have an answer. I'll have to look into that and get back to you to see whether that would be allowed as a non-conforming use. I'm not sure. I have to look at this chapter and maybe ask the solicitor the question, but I can get back to you.
Okay, thanks. Yeah. Okay, so I'm okay with, based off of, again, the feedback from the person that has the most intel on this entire topic. I'm not sure when you did all this research, but that's what retirement
It's
does. I
amazing
can't wait.
when you're
Can't wait.
retired.
Can't wait.
And most people
Okay.
actually buy their chickens mail order, and you don't know whether the chicken is a male or female until they get older. And then I don't know what they do with the roosters, because not allowed to have roosters hardly anywhere because they make too much noise. So
Okay, so Sean, the answer is we are going to say no to the change in the ordinance. It sounds like that's what our recommendation will be. But yes, Sally, please look into, I'd be curious for the responsible homeowner that has had chickens in the past or what have you, and what happens if she does have this permit. Thank you.
the mayor wants to talk.
Oh, yeah, come on down.
No, Mayor, we tabled that. We tabled it until we figured out what the heck to do with these chickens. And to Sally's and our team's situation, they'll, if the chickens are housed properly, you won't even know they're there because they're in the backyard with a high fence or a fence you can't see them because they're not allowed to be seen and according to the ordinance. So, and they're not allowed in the front yard. So.
Not like children who should
No.
be seen and not heard,
No,
chickens.
yeah.
All right. Yeah, so for those who are listening on Facebook, what the mayor had asked was that she thought maybe the permit had already been issued in a prior meeting, and the answer was no, it got tabled. All right, any further questions or comments on this one? Okay, so Sean, you got a recommendation? Okay, cool. All right, so next, item D, motion to direct the solicitor to draft an amendment to Chapter 112 zoning, building height. Issue is the council directed the planning commission to recommend a change in building height regulations. So I think that the long story or the short story is that we were presented with a recommendation from the planning commission a month or two ago. And Sean and Sally both came back and they're like, let's talk to them first and make sure we understand what they're requesting. And Sean and Sally did talk to the planning commission. And after everyone talked, it actually sounds like it made a lot of sense to you guys. And so you're good with it. So Sean just gave a thumbs up again for those who can't see him on screen. We'll have subtitles next. Bill, can you get on subtitles at some point? Yeah. All right. So I think, Sean, do you want, or Sally? Oh, here, we got it up here. So do either of you want to kind of just give a summary to remind the committee up here what the changes are that are being asked for, just so we remind what we're looking at?
The changes really relate to a different technique to evaluate building height than we currently use for large buildings on sloping sites. And the new proposal is to establish something called if you can scroll down, I want to use the right word, finished ground plane, a reference plane, excuse me. So I had a conversation with the planning commission at their meeting and tried to figure out what a reference plane was and how it would be determined on sloping sites. And I'm confident I understand their intent. So just imagine a flat plane that is at the average grade of a site that slopes. So some part of this site is going to be sloped up out of the plane, and some part of the site is going to be sloped under this imaginary plane. And the volume of soil above and below should be roughly equal. And then from that ground plane, another plane parallel to that is created and to the height allowed in the zoning district, and no part of the building can protrude through that upper ground plane. Excepting, I believe if we're going to keep the 20% for elevator shafts and HVAC equipment, that's a typical thing you see. If any of you are out for the photo op yesterday, you got to see the top of the new hotel going up, and you got to see the top of Chestnut Square Apartments. There are HVAC equipments, elevator towers, service things that kind of stick up out of flat roofs. So that makes a lot of sense to leave that in there. So I understand the technique to evaluate it, and what it's going to result in is, I believe, a stricter standard for building height, especially on lots that are slopey, for lack of a better word. And so I understand how to coach and relay that information out of the zoning officer should council approve this zoning amendment. So I'm good.
Sean, the question I have is, who determines the measuring spot? You know, where we're going to measure from. I know we're starting on a corner. They take Mitch's Gym. You start flat right there at New Street, and by the time you get down to Wayne Street, it's about 12 to 14 feet different. So are we going to say New Street is the flat area as the sea, what's it called, above sea level, or what? Would they use that, or do they just pick us? Because I can see an attorney that's on West Minor Street coming here saying, we don't like where you picked a spot. Who determines the spot?
Zoning officer makes the determination. The zoning officer makes the legal determination whether something's compliant or not with the code. And we can coach the zoning officer on what the planning commission's intent was. And I think it's pretty clear, at least to me, how it's supposed to work. So on the site you mentioned, the way this is proposed, this reference plane, imagine where the building intersects the finished grade, the ground, not where the building actually touches the ground, but 6 feet out from that point away from the building. And then trace that line, imaginary line around the entire building. And there's probably a way to figure this out with calculus or whatever, but you figure out what's the average grade above sea level of that squiggly line that kind of goes up on one side of the building, maybe it's flat on the other, and maybe comes back down the other side, and maybe it's flat on the bottom side, or maybe it slopes a little bit. Find out what that number is, where if you took an imaginary plane and ran it right through the finished grade site, there'd be roughly equal volumes of soil above and below this imaginary plane. That's the average, or that's the reference plane. And that's your starting point to measure height from. So on the downslope side of sites, you might be looking up at the reference plane. It might be 7, 8 feet above your head. And on the upslope side of sites, the reference plane might be 10 feet in the ground. But irregardless, you're going to measure building height from that reference plane up, whatever the zoning district allows you to go to for maximum. A lot of the boroughs 35, some of it's 45, and we have overlay districts that are up to 75. So pretty simple.
So with that, there was a lot of discussion and debate around the building height of the proposed Burger King spot. This would have definitively defined what that was and whether or not it met or exceeded.
I think the method employed to evaluate the first and now second preliminary plans, what was the word you used? Definitive?
I don't know.
Is definitive, is determined, and is exact. It was just a different technique employed because the language was different in the zoning code at the time. It still is as of right now. And the technique the zoning officer employed to evaluate that language was applied consistently to that project as well as to 330 West Market.
Okay, thank you.
No question. So since the Burger King site is in litigation based on height,
Other things.
yeah, what parking and other things, would it be prudent to have our zoning officer? I know that they won't be able to use the standard that we're going to be approving in the future, but to actually see if it's truly within the height requirement, because we have members of the planning commission that didn't agree, and we have residents that didn't agree, and then we had employees that didn't agree. Would it make sense to do that, or just stay out of the fray?
I think in that case, in case of what's been the technique used and what's been determined, and the zoning officer's determination in that project and through 330 West Market are consistent with one another, and we're trying to evaluate the new, round 2 preliminary plan submission for 410 South High, applying the same consistent metric that we did with the other 2 plans. As an exercise, anybody could do that. Sure. Yeah. Anybody could take a new set of rules and evaluate and see what would the result be of evaluating building height. I didn't get into that with the planning commission, but that's exactly what I would expect your planning commission to be able to do for you, is to kind of play around the sandbox and come up with a standard that addresses what are their concerns and forward it to you with their recommendations. You have a lot of skilled professionals who understand building height and urban design really well on that planning commission. So I wasn't there for the March, April, or June meetings, but I did go to the July meeting. And that's what a planning commission does for you. It does just what you said. It games rules and standards to get the results that that it thinks makes most sense for the town.
So yeah, I mean, I would be curious just to help with my understanding of the recommendation to kind of see how it differs, how if we worked with this recommendation, how Burger King or, yeah, what it would look like. Because I'm trying to visualize at this point in time. So you're saying it's basically you take an average, you create a plane, and you got 45 feet from that middle. So the top section's going to be actually taller and the bottom's going to be shorter because you're measuring against something that's a little bit higher.
Yeah, if you're looking at a large building on a sloping site and you're standing at the high point of the site and you look up at the building, it's going to, from eyes on the ground, appear shorter than the maximum height limit in the borough. Because the ground plane might be 10 feet below the ground, or the reference plane. Whereas you walk around the other side of the building to the low spot of the site, the reference plane might be 10 feet above your head. The building's going to look 55 or 57 feet tall, if 45 is the limit. You follow?
It might be 6 stories on the one end and then 5 stories on the other end. Is that?
You'd have stories.
More parking? Ooh, I like it already. All right, wait, approved.
We have a couple garages like that downtown, don't we? That come in off the alley at a higher ramp, and then you can enter the garage from the street side at the lower elevation. So you actually get 2 decks of parking, but you don't have to build a ramp.
Moody's is that way. Eli Kahn owns it. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, is that why when they say the word mass, Tom Doherty, he wants to be called Doherty, I think, but he's always talking about the slope side looks like it's too mass, the mass of the building versus the other end of the building. That's a common argument I hear when I go to the planning commission meeting, the mass of the building. Does that change anything with the way we're going to be building them?
That's an effect of this standard that's before you. Yes, yeah. So on slopey sites, like I was mentioning earlier, when you're on the downslope side of it, you might be looking up at a building that to the man or woman on the street looking up is going to appear higher than 45 feet. And when the opposite's going to be true if that person is standing on the high side of the site, they're going to be looking at a building that might look 30 feet tall.
Be a great exercise.
All right, so how do you guys feel about this? Any other questions? Good, moving forward? All right, we're good. Thank you. All right, new business.
Yeah, I apologize. Let's just clarify this last motion that the last recommendation you did. Because in the memo, not only is there a zoning definition, there's a saldo piece in there too. So what we should have written in this motion was a change to the subdivision land development ordinance. And it's simply a piece that says plant submittal requirements. I think it's a great idea to require the applicant to just spell out what we want to see with the submission package. Because I think what happened, and it caused a little consternation at 410 South High, was we didn't require that exhibit right away. The zoning officer saw the exhibit, and the planning commission didn't see it because it wasn't part of the package. And there's a little disconnect between the information flow. So getting it in the submission package would be a really smart thing to do.
Agreed. Yeah. Yep. We should have as much upfront because when there's ambiguity, we get through the first pass. And if we say the first pass is okay, then it's assumed sometimes in the second pass. And you know what assume means, right? Chickens. Means
Yeah.
chickens. All right. Okay. So we're all good with that one too. Okay. All right, moving again to new business. Any new business to bring up? I don't see any. Any other business to bring up? All right, this meeting's adjourned at 7:29.